This is lesson 5.2, factoring trinomials in elementary algebra. You have factored trinomials prior to this in Algebra 1, but we're going to keep going with this and keep practicing at this because factoring trinomials is one of these skills you will use forever and ever in math. Plus, it's one of those skills that a lot of students struggle with. So we'll start out with some that are simple. And these are the ones that you've done before. We have no number in front of that x squared. Well, we have a 1 there, but we don't show it. And when you are going to factor a trinomial, one of the things you need to remember is right now you don't want a number in front of there. I'll teach you what to do if there's a number in front of there later. But we just want an x squared. And we make two parentheses. Take the square root of that term, put it there. Okay? Now what we're trying to do is find two numbers that when we multiply, we get 12. When we add, we get 8. Positive 12, positive 8. So, 3 times 4 gives me 12, but 3 and 4 does not give me 8, so that doesn't work. 12 times 1 gives me 12, but 12 and 1 do not give me 8. 6 and 2 give me 12. 6 plus 2 gives me 8. So that's how I choose. And it doesn't matter which one goes where, 6 or the 2 in the front or the back. And that is it for that one there. And they will progressively get a little bit tougher as we go. X squared minus 2x minus 15. Again, we make two parentheses. And one of the things that I need to remind you is that these will work. These will factor into two binomials. But sometimes they don't. And there's three different ways that we can factor these. Now, factoring them into two binomials or two sets of terms. See, they're called binomials because we have two terms in each parenthesis. So that's the easiest way. That's what we would like them to do as factor, but sometimes they don't, and then we have to use other methods, which we'll get into later. But right now, let's just be happy that they factor into two binomials. Okay, square root of the x squared. Two numbers multiplied give me negative 15, added give me a negative 2. So let's just go with 5 and 3. So I'm just going to put a 5 and a 3 in there right now. And now the part is, are they positive or negative, 5 and 3? Well, one of them is going to be negative and one of them will be positive because a negative times a positive gives me a negative answer here. Two numbers multiply together give me negative 15. One of them has got to be negative. But the one that's negative has to be such that when I add these two together, I get a negative 2. So if I need a negative 2 when I add them, the bigger number has to be negative so that when I add the smaller number, I get a negative there. And that's my answer. Alright, so all these handy dandy little clues to do this, but sometimes you forget them. Alright, let's move on to example 3. Alright, example 3 gives us 2x squared plus 10x minus 28. Okay, problem. We have a 2 in front of there. We can't have one of those. But all of my numbers are even, so I'm going to factor out a 2. And I'm assuming you know what I did there. I took my 10 and made it 2 times 5, and took my 28 and made it 14 times 2. So I factored the 2's out of there and was left with a 5 and a 14. Alright, so the 2 just kind of gets drug along. Alright, two binomials, square root of the first term. Two numbers multiplied give me negative 14, added give me a positive 5. So again, these numbers have got to be a positive and a negative so that when I multiply a positive times a negative, I get a negative. So 7 and 2 are going to be the numbers that I use. So I'm just going to put a 7 and 2 in here and then decide which one's positive and which one's a negative. Well, this is a positive, so that means my biggest number has to be a positive. So now when I take positive 7 and a negative 2, I get that 5x. Okay, so you're starting to see the little pattern here that the sign of the largest number, let's get my the sign of the largest number is always going to be the sign here. So I needed this to be positive, so my largest number had to be positive. Alright, so let's do 2 more and then we'll be done. Alright, so let's see if I can get rid of a bunch of this junk. Oh, one fell swoop. 3x cubed minus 3x squared minus 18x. Alright, well, what do I have common? I've got a 3, and I can take a 3 out of there because this can be written as 3 times 6. So I can take my 3's out. And I'm going to take an x out of there, 1x out of there, and 1x out of there. So I'm going to take an x out, and I'm left with x squared from right here, minus x from right here, minus 6 from right there. Okay, so once I'm at this point, now I can factor. Two numbers multiplied together give me a negative 6, so I know one's a plus and one's a negative. Alright, now I need a 1. So 6 and 1, those don't combine. I mean, they multiply to give me 6, but I can't get a 1 here. And 3 and 2 is the only one that works. So 3 is my largest number, so it goes with this sign. And 2 is my smallest, and it goes there, and I'm done. Okay, one more. Alright, so this one is a little tricky. Alright, so let's go ahead and make my 2 parentheses. Put an x there and an x there. These are both pluses, so I can put pluses here. I don't have to worry about a positive and a negative because there aren't any. Alright, so these are ones that can be a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find 2 numbers to get multiply that give me 12y squared. Well, I know if I put a y here, a y times y gives me my y squared, and I just have to come up with the number to put in there. So if I put a 6 times 2, what do I get? I get a 6y and a 2y multiplied together are going to give me 12y squared. 6 and 2 is 8, but where in the, and I've got my y squared, or my y here, because when I add 6y plus 2y, I get 8y, but what about my x? Well, let's look and see what happens here. If I were to use the FOIL method, and let's get this stuff out of our way here. If I were to use the FOIL method and multiply these, first would give me x squared. Outside, which would be this one and this one, give me 2xy. So see, now I've got an xy, which is part of my middle term. Inside would be multiply those. And last, this one and this one. So when I add those two together, I get 8xy, which is what I had up there. Okay, so these are a little bit tricky in that you're looking for, so I got all this stuff in there, it's going to be, let's use my pointer. I'm looking for a number that multiplied together is going to give me the 12y. Let's see if I can get some of this stuff cleaned up. Okay. So here's the problem right there. So when I'm doing ones that have an x and a y here, it has an x here and a y here and the combination of the two here, I'm going to put an x as my first term. So I know I'm going to have an x here and here, and because that y is squared, I know I'm going to have a y there and there. And then I just have to look for numbers. Multiplied give me 12, and that's where the 6 and the 2 came from. Added together give me 8. Okay, now even though there is an x right here, I don't have to worry about it because when I do FOIL, when I take my insides and multiply them, see my x and y mix there, and that's where the xy comes from. And when I take my outsides, my x and y mix. So I'm going to get my x eventually. So the key thing you need to look at is square root of that, square root of that. So y and x. And then worry about the 12 and the 8 and kind of ignore this x here because it'll all come together in the end. Alright, so that is lesson 5.2 in elementary algebra.